many people were there, do you think?
15,000.
20,000 minimum. That is, if we go by the standard of our time, where you have husband and a wife and 2 kids. But if you go by the standard of their time, it could have been 50, 100,000. Remember, like Jacob had 12 boys and 1 girl. So they had large families, but we will go with the standard of our time and say they were about 20,000 people. There is a little bit more details that we get from the Gospel of John. So go with me to the Gospel of John. And let's pick up the story at chapter 6, verse 7 and 8. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. 200 denarii, that's the equivalent of 6 months of wages. And they said, we can't do this. Even if we go and work for 6 months, we cannot feed them. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? So whatever we got is not enough. But Jesus said, well, give me the bread, give me the fish, seat the crowd. And he looked up into heaven, and he prayed, and he blessed the bread, which was like pita bread, and he broke it into half, just like this. And miraculously, every piece became a full one. He did the same thing with the fish, and a crowd of 20,000 people were fed. And there were 12 baskets of leftover, one for every one of the doubting disciples. That's what happened. I'm going to share with you a couple lessons. The first lesson is the disciples lived in a world of very limited possibilities. All what they came up with was excuses for not being able to take care of the problem, not being able to take care of the crowd. But Jesus lived in a world of unlimited possibilities. Nothing is impossible for him. And he demonstrated that for us. Where do you want to live? Limited possibilities or unlimited possibilities? If you are with Jesus, nothing is impossible. Notice an interesting thing in the Bible. This story is recorded in chapter 14 of Matthew. But there is a very interesting story recorded in chapter 15 of Matthew. So you think that the 2 chapters happen approximately within few days, at the most few weeks. So go with me to Matthew chapter 15. And at the top of verse 32, in my Bible, I have the New King James, it says, feeding the 4,000. So now we have a crowd of 16,000. This is much smaller crowd than we have in chapter 14. Same problem. identical problem. And notice verse 33. Then his disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? You just saw him doing it. But they forgot. I think one of the greatest challenges we have is to forget how God has led us in the past.
Amen.
To forget that He's always with us. That He's always capable of taking care of our problems. I mean, after all, He fed 2 million people in the desert for 40 years. But what is feeding 20,000 or 16,000? It's nothing to it. We need to live in a world of unlimited possibilities.
Amen.
The other lesson is, there was a little boy who was the source of blessing for everyone. Here it says, it's in John, it says in verse 9 of chapter 6, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. You would think that in a crowd of 20,000, there's few people who have some food with them. But only one was willing to give of his lunch. We don't know anything about this little boy. We don't know his name, his tribe, but we know that he was generous. And here is the amazing thing. In the hands of Jesus, 5 barley bread loaves and 2 fish became the source of blessing for everyone. Isn't that amazing?
Amen.
One day Jesus saw a woman give 2 pennies, and that registered in his mind. And they put it in the Bible, so everyone would be inspired by what she did. We all are inspired by what this boy did. It's not the size of our gifts. It's not the size of our giftedness, but it's the size of our hearts that count. How willing are we to give of ourselves? And no matter how small or meager the offering you have, or the talents you have, in the hands of Jesus, it will be a great blessing to great multitudes. Interestingly enough, this boy came actually from a very poor family. And the way we know this is because he had 5 barley bread. Barley was for the poor, wheat was for the rich. Now we know that barley is better for you than wheat, but they didn't know that at that time. The second way, we know that he came from a very poor family. He only had 2 fish. So he will eat 3 sandwiches, plain empty. But he had a big heart and gave of his lunch. No matter what you give, God will bless it.
Amen.
I will make it a blessing to others. On a Friday afternoon, I got a telephone call from my conference president. He said, Pastor Joe, I am coming over to your area on Wednesday afternoon. Can we go out to dinner? I said, I will go out to dinner with you anytime you want me, as long as you pay for it. So we went out to dinner, and there was a lot of chit-chats. And I knew there must be more to it than just treating me out to dinner. Finally, he got to the point. And he said, we are really hurting financially at the conference. And we have to lay off 2 pastors. But the pastor of the district next to you have accepted a call to go outside of the conference. So we thought about giving you one of his churches and giving his other church to the pastor on the other side. So in this case, we will only have to lay off 1 pastor. Well, I said, oh, no problem. I would love to have another church. We already had a big church, and we planted a church, and we were in the process of planting another one. So I said, tell me more about this church. He said, a group of German immigrants came to this valley next to you, and they built the most magnificent church in the whole valley. They built an auditorium. They had a wonderful school. They built a community service. They grew to about 120 people. And as I was listening to him, I noticed that everything he was talking about was in the past. So I said, what about today? What happened to this group? He said, well, because of internal conflicts, this group of people, it dwindled down to 13. I said, that's fine. Do they do any kind of outreach to the community? He said, the last time they did any kind of evangelism or outreach was 26 years ago. I said, do they have any baptism? He said, the last baptism that church experience was 20 years ago. I said, I don't want this church. He said, it is yours. It's our gift to you. So the whole thing was a done deal. It was just to announce it to me. I said, fine, I'll take it. Well, I went to my office. I prayed a lot. I came up with a list of 10 points to revive this church. And I went to my first board meeting. And then I said, you know, this is heavy stuff. Let me start with something light. So I said, I noticed that we don't have any form of communication at this church. It would be nice at least to start with a bulletin. Head elder stood up. He was always in the habit of standing up every time he talked, and he talked with a very thick German accent. And he said, that's a ridiculous idea. We don't need bulletins. There are only 13 of us. And this is going to destroy planet Earth if we take the trees and cut them. And he went on and on for a whole lecture about the environment. And at the end, I said, I didn't want to destroy planet Earth because of my 13 bulletins. So by the time he was done talking, I checked out. I didn't care about anything. My first Sabbath there were only 9 people. I never saw 13 people. But if you add myself, my wife, my 2 kids, that would make it 13 people. They were at least people of hope. Well, I went to my second board meeting. That was my first board meeting, and then my first Sabbath. And now I'm preparing for my second board meeting. I knelt down. I improved on my list. I prayed over it. And I went to the board meeting. And I said, well, I will start with something light. I said, I noticed we don't have potlucks in this church. It would be nice to eat with each other so we could get to know each other. Head elder stood up. My heart went down. Every time this guy talked, he ruined my day.
Yeah, man.
I mean, absolutely. And he said, that is the worst idea I ever have heard in my life. I said, why? It's nice to eat with each other, get to know each other. He said, Pastor, we hate each other over here. If we eat with each other, we will kill each other. And he went on for a whole hour telling me about the terrible history of this church and all of the fights they had. I felt like I needed a counselor at the end of that meeting. Well, I left. Third board meeting. This time, I said, no more icebreakers, no more simple things. I'm going to get to my agenda. So I said, I noticed that we don't have Sabbath school for the children. And there was a good reason behind that. Because there were no children in that church. In fact, the youngest person in that church was a woman. And her name was Edna. And she was 81 years old. 81, that was the youngest person in that church. But my idea was, we could go out in the neighborhood, get some of the kids to come, have some Bible lessons with them, give them some food. Hopefully they like it enough to invite their friends, their mom and dad. Head elder stood up after he heard me, and my heart went down. And he said, that's not a bad idea. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And then he said, as long as you will be in it. That's referring to me. And then he proceeded to say how I was the worst pastor he ever have worked with. And he spent a whole hour talking about all of my faults and weaknesses, and then out of the goodness of his heart, he volunteered to teach me how to become a better pastor.
Amen.
Amen. He doesn't even know me to know if I was a bad pastor. I was so discouraged. Not so much even about talking about all of my faults. I was discouraged because this man was killing the church. I left. I was so discouraged, I called a friend of mine. And I started to cry on his shoulders. Well, figuratively